Hi, Bill here. We're going to look at student series projects now, once again with the help of people who deal professionally with illustration. And we'll begin with work by Sauvie Quinn, reviewed by Andrew Hall.
This is a series of 3 images that have to connect with each other. Possibly could suggest some kind of sequential narrative, I'm not sure these do. And I think the student had a lot of freedom to decide what to put into the imagery and what to communicate. It's a nice example of illustration, image making, allowing an audience to go into a different space, and this feels like quite a scary, ghostly space where things would happen that you wouldn't normally expect to happen in daily life. So we have the first image of this rather sort of strange character, bit like Nosferatu, sort of rearing up above a bedstead, and it does make you think of kind of Victorian ghost stories and sort of creepy happenings. It's quite nice the way the character is not completed in terms of their body, so again you start to imagine quite what's at the bottom, and it's quite confrontational. The character is looking straight at the audience. It can be quite arresting. Black and white is always good for this kind of thing, light and dark, and there's a whole Hollywood genre called film noir that specifically visually exploits the mix of black and white, of light and shadows. The second image brings in a bit of red, and we have a mosquito, which I think most of us are pretty uncomfortable with. There's quite a nice tension between softer watercolour marks and more linear work. We've got the pencil work, I believe, of the doorway, which is in a grey, and then we have the black of the mosquito with the red, which presumably suggests blood, which is very much in the sort of foreground. So it's really worth looking at landscape artists, both in terms of painting and drawing, and the way that you can create what's called aerial perspective of things getting lighter as they move away from you by softening your tones, which is to do with atmospheric interference, but it will create space in your drawings. Someone like Van Gogh was interesting in that he made the marks in the foreground much bigger than the marks as they moved off into the distance, and again that can really create a sense of space in your drawings. And then we have a fetus and a raised arm. It looks like the mother's arm, and an exaggerated form of the word sleep. We're not quite sure what we're looking at. We have to sort of deconstruct them in our mind, and I think sometimes that can be fun when you don't quite know straight away what you're looking at. You've got to kind of differentiate that between something that's interesting and something that is just confusing. In terms of the series, they do hang together because he or she is using the same medium. Using red in one of them perhaps doesn't create the consistency that one would be looking for, so I think there could have been 2 more spots of red, one in each of the other images, but interesting in terms of a mental space that an image draws you into.
Thanks, Andy.
I'm here today looking at Sara's set of 3 pieces for a series reportage. I think they work really well together. They also communicate 3 aspects of the Arctic very, very well. First of all, the sort of coldness and underwaterness side of it all with this fish. Then with the less sparse but still hostile mountain regions of the bear, and then even more so with the coldness of the Arctic when the ox comes along in his winter coat. All in all, I think these are a very charming set of illustrations. They have a very clever naivety about them. The detail is very sparing in certain ways, which I really like. The ox, if you look at his legs, you're not making him photographic. What you have done is just using a bit of the dark across his back. You've given him a depth and a weight, and you've done the same with the bear. I think the bear's fantastic. I think out of all of this, you've made a really lovely looking bear here, and I think it's the most successful thing about the 3. Your turn of tone for just underneath his feet, and also the hump on his back, and then the ear nearer to that you've given it a lovely, lovely depth with very lightness of handling, and he's a lovely shape. And with the fish, the main description about the fish is about the red ventral colour, and you've made that slap bang in the middle of the page as your main piece of communication. And he's very beautifully done. The fish itself, I like your line work. The red wash works beautifully. Again, your shadowing is beautiful. There's a nice lightness of touch, and having the second one down here in the left corner gives it a really nice balance to the whole overall image. With the text, that's my only reservation with this. The text here works better because it's in the middle. With the bear, again, it's more readable, but I think it gets confusing with the ox. It's fine the first line running across the mountains, but then in the second bit it's quite text intense, and for handwritten some people find that really difficult to deal with. I also have to say that there is a grammatical error. They have extremely thick code. If you're going to bring text into your image, it is an absolute, you've got to get it subbed before you submit your work, because you've got an army of sub-editors working across the board with illustration, and they like their text to be plain, easy to read and spelled correctly. That's their job. If there's some way you can start to augment your writing to make it look slightly more clear and give it slightly more space, it would just make it easier, because if this is going to be an article that people learn from, they have to be able to read it properly. And that's my only negative really to this. Otherwise, I think as a set of three, they're lovely. I could see them being used in, especially in children's illustration, but I think they still appeal to adults. But I think for children's illustration and also for children's supplements, maybe within other things, you know, quite often you'll get people in the Guardian newspaper, they'll publish a wall chart, and I can imagine these animals really translating very well to a fact wall chart about an area. So all in all, well done, but yes, just beware of your text.
Thanks, Sam.
Hello, I'm Minna Alanko, Finnish illustrator working mostly on books and editorial illustration, and this series of illustrations is made by Emma Evanson. When I first saw this series of illustrations, I used most of my time with this illustration where a fly is standing on a newspaper. Why I find this illustration so appealing is that it tells me a story. It makes me smile and it feeds my imagination. I think that the presence of this fly and the stains underneath him enhance the dirtiness of the gossip that is going on this newspaper article. And with a closer look, I can see that the same sentences keep on repeating and almost spinning around this fly. So I think this illustration could be a strong opening illustration or a starting point for a story. And I really want to know more. What has this fly seen? When I look at all the three illustrations, I see that this series is probably a nature study of insects. But since I was so carried away with this fly, I automatically start looking for a story in the other two illustrations as well. The background is quite neutral in remaining two illustrations. It simply seems to mark the space behind the insects and not much more, giving the main role to insects. This made me think that it's really interesting how much impact a background of illustration has on the interpretation of the image in terms of visual storytelling. For me, that fly really stands out from the series, mainly because the background gives so much information, and also because this fly makes an eye contact on the viewer of the illustration. All in all, I think insects is also a good topic for a nature study and really worth researching, especially because it serves as a great reference material for creating characters. Thank you, Emma, for these beautiful illustrations.
Thank you, Mina.
Sall Mills has created a lovely reportage illustration of her travels in China, in Shan Province, Fengxi and Beijing. Each of the three illustrations captures a street vendor within their local setting. The series as a whole works really well together. Sall uses a consistency of palette and mark making and line work that holds the series together. She repeats certain motifs like stars, Chinese lettering, and the use of the three characters that creates a sense of narrative through the three pieces. I particularly like her use of colour palette. Having travelled through China myself, red is a very dominant colour in China. It's an auspicious colour, and Sall uses red as the dominant colour within the three illustrations, varying it in each illustration from a pink red through to a crimson red through to a more orange red. And this is a really nice and subtle variation that holds the illustrations together yet keeps each one unique. Against the bold red, she uses natural and desaturated hues to give a real feel of real life, of earthiness, of street, of things happening within a local setting. And again, I think that's really effective. These colours and line work sit on top of a textured background, which gives that lovely reportage feel of a sketchbook, things happening in the moment, mark making, texture, scene setting is very effective. My favourite of the series is her first illustration, which looks at Cham province and of kebabs being made in a street scene. The reason this is my favourite illustration is because this is the one she most sympathetically captures the kebab maker, but also she is most adventurous with her use of line, not always putting in a strong black line, but in some cases using red line work instead. The composition as a whole works better. She uses more of the page, and the placing of the different items within the illustration really start to draw a story together. I feel like I know where this kebab maker is, I know that street. The details are really effective. If I was to give any advice to Sall, I just feel that if she were to change her formula slightly within each image so that there was more variety within the series, maybe in some cases the character is much smaller and other details are bigger, or different perspectives, so the reader starts to feel that they're looking from different vantage points. I feel like the use of composition could really enhance the images and the way the viewer starts to get a sense of the world she's reporting.
Thanks, Joanna. And for those of you on the course, I hope that was helpful.